Thank you so very much for that kind introduction, and welcome to our panel, to our spotlight discussion between a rock and a hard place, anticipating future cybersecurity challenges. In this spotlight, we want to do a little bit of a deep dive on the future challenges, but then really also identify what we can do about it across policy fields, across business, policymakers, experts, and so on. And what I really hope is that we can answer to the motto of the Munich Security Conference of this year, which is unlearning helplessness. And I hope that after our panel discussion, we will know that we are not helpless and that we actually can do quite a bit if we do it together. And for this, I have a really excellent panel. I'm delighted to welcome General David Petraeus, who is partner at KKR and chairman of the KKR Global Institute, which the General established in May 2013. It is also a pleasure to welcome Alex Stamos. He is director of Stanford Internet Observatory in San Francisco, and you have made it your mission to, I hope I'm right, to improve cybersecurity by working with experts, business leaders, and entrepreneurs, but also by teaching at the Stanford University and get students on board on this process. And Jeff Moss, he is the founder of Black Hat and DEFCON conference, the DEFCON conference series, and you are also currently a member of the U.S. Homeland Security Advisory Council and the Global Council on the Stability of Cyberspace. And you are also non-resident fellow in many institutions and on the board of many think tanks. I'm very happy to have all three of you today in this spotlight discussion. To prepare for moderating this discussion, I took a look at the latest World Economic Forum Global Risk Report. And what I found staggering were a couple of numbers. And especially two. And the report found that in 2020, malware and ransomware attacks increased by 358% and 435% respectively in 2020. I think this underlines really what we are talking about, but you are the experts. And what I want to start out with is a short round asking all of you, what do you see are the greatest cyber security challenges in the next 10 to 15 years? And I would love to start with you, General.
Well, thanks very much, Stormy. It's great to see you again, and it's really wonderful to be with two true legends in the cyber field, obviously Alex and Jeff. And I must say it's also great to be in Munich, even if I am zooming in from my hotel room in Munich. But first, I want to focus on two issues that are in addition to the colossal challenges that really were already highlighted and have been re-highlighted. But the first two speakers identify those of filling the enormous shortage of cybersecurity professionals and also building the culture that CISA Director Jen Easterly described as hugely important also. Here, I just might note that I have continued gratitude to her for what she did back in Iraq, not as in Iraq, between Iraq and a hard place, but really in Iraq, back during the surge in Iraq when she came out from NSA for a week and went home 6 months later after building what has become known as the cyber fusion capability, the real-time regional gateway, that, as she noted during her remarks earlier in this session, literally took thousands of seriously bad guys off the battlefield. The two issues on which I'd like to focus, again, cybersecurity challenges. The first is, I think, the single biggest, and this is embracing and operationalizing something that is very challenging. It is understanding that no cybersecurity application or product can by itself provide adequate cybersecurity. Rather, what is needed is a comprehensive, integrated, managed cybersecurity solution based on zero trust principles. That is an enormously big idea. And it's even more enormously difficult to operationalize. It typically requires somewhere between 80 and 90 or so applications and products, all of which must be integratable, can be actually installed, managed, constantly updated, overseen by an ops center. And again, based on the idea of zero trust principles as well. And again, this, I think, is the single biggest of the big ideas about cybersecurity, and also the one that is in many cases the most elusive. The second huge challenge, I think, is the growing imperative. We've known about this for a long time, but it just seems as if ever more important that we figure out how to do much greater sharing of threat intelligence at real time, at machine speed, driven by algorithms, not by people, not, a call from the FBI's field office to you saying you've been hacked, but a machine notification. Noting that, of course, there are certain ecosystems, certain areas of infrastructure in the United States, for example, that are really quite well integrated, and the gold standard would be the banking sector, the financial sector, just because they have to. The penalties for a breach are so enormous, and the Treasury Department does a very good job of overseeing that. But that is really the outlier. The norm is not that. And despite the new initiative, the Cybersecurity Defense Collaborative, which CISA is pursuing, which I commend very strongly, we've got to build out something much, much larger. And to figure out how to do that with trusted networks, and again, get this going at machine speed rather than at the speed of a human. And so those would be the two that I would nominate for the Academy Award and the two most difficult cybersecurity challenges out there.
Thank you so much, General. And we certainly will come back to the question of how to get there as well in the second round. But first, let us now also hear from Jeff. What do you think are in your point of view, the greatest challenges?
So there's a couple. I mean, we could talk all day in nuance, but I think the big picture for this audience is the movement into the political realm, the movement into the geopolitical realm of some of these things that were niche concepts, concerns of CISOs, but not really the general public, definitely not really at a national political level that are now. So let me point to maybe two things. When Stuxnet first happened, one of the reactions was that, oh, look, there's a new tool in the toolkit of proportional response where we can now do these sort of cyberkinetic responses without having to blow up a power plant. We can do it with a very targeted, very focused, effect. Speed forward to the modern day, China and India have a skirmish on their border. And what is their response? Well, India decides to ban apps from their app store. Chinese apps that are generating money for Chinese businesses are banned in India. Sort of this app diplomacy has started. China can't easily respond because China's preemptively banned all the Indian apps. There are no Indian apps on the Chinese app store. And so you're starting to see other countries adopt in their political responses technological capabilities. And so I think that's pretty new. The other new thing is really the political targeting of malware. A few years ago, really, malware was quite small. There wasn't there was some research and development in it, but it was not like today's environment. And I think a lot of that can be it has been driven by nation state interests, imposing costs through a third party on certain Western countries, specifically United States. Well, that has a knock-on effect. Everybody learns, right? Attacks never get simpler. I mean, never get harder, they only get simpler. And so now the real criminals have also learned those techniques. So I think we're going to be operating in that environment. And you layer that whole thing and you drop it on a multi-tenant cloud kind of centralized environment where everything is dual use. And if any one of the tenants on the cloud are attacked, it's essentially as if all of them are attacked if it's a DDoS against the infrastructure. And so we're walking toward this more fragile, more centralized infrastructure for efficiency's sake. And every one of these things has a big political component that we're going to have to deal with.
Thank you very much, Jeff. And Alex, I saw you nodding a couple of times, so I hand over immediately to you.
Yeah, well, I agree with everything the General and Jeff said. I think to build on both what the General said around workforce development and Jeff on the geopolitics, from my perspective, one of the kind of driving issues of the last 5-6 years that I think will continue for the next 10 is that the line over which an organization is important enough to have the top level adversaries, people who are real true professionals who will spend 6 months, 9 months, a year trying to break into one organization. That line has only constantly moved down over the last 20 years, right? If you look at the early 2000s, we have intrusions by Chinese groups and Russian groups against the defense industrial base, the Northrop Grummins, the BAE systems, and the like, the Airbuses. And then you have oil and gas, and you have the big banks. And 2009, you have the attacks against the tech industry. And so we've seen more and more industries end up on the list of companies that have to worry about this. The truth is that that line is almost at the floor now, that any organization larger than a mom and pop shop now is possibly facing really high-end professional attackers, either because the definition of what is a legitimate target of state actors has broadened extremely widely, or because of ransomware, because of the incredible amount of money in the post-cryptocurrency era, the incredible amount of money that people can legitimately make hacking. When Jeff and I were coming up, when I was going to DEFCON when I was 17 years old, and Jeff was a slightly older, which he looks younger now, but I just want to make for the record that Jeff is definitely older than me. When I was 17, 18 years old, you couldn't go be a professional hacker and make millions and millions of dollars a year. It actually, that's kind of a rumor that existed, but actually getting away with stealing all that money and spending the rest of your life on an island was extremely difficult. And today, on a normal Tuesday, you might have $100 million theft or a massive ransom being paid. And so the change in the economics and the change in the alignment of state companies, of state organized actors, means that the threat profile for most organizations got way worse, and those organizations are not ready. I do a lot of work with big companies in the US, and I would estimate that maybe half of the Fortune 500 of the largest 500 publicly traded companies in the US have a modern defensive outlook on cyber, that they have something approaching a zero trust architecture, that they have EDR capabilities that allow them to monitor all their endpoints. They have logging and timelining capability on a single pane of glass, that they have the ability to track and isolate individuals, conditional access controls that allow them to make decisions of whether somebody's trustworthy or not, passwordless architectures. Probably only half of the big companies, and I expect that's the same for the DAX in Germany. If you look at those 40 companies, maybe half of them are ready to play at this level and half of them aren't. And we don't have anywhere near the amount of talent necessary to get all of those organizations up and running. And we're not just talking about the Fortune 500 and the DAX 40 anymore. We're talking about thousands and thousands of companies that are up there. I think that's one of the lessons of last year when you have companies like SolarWinds, which is a company that nobody had ever heard of outside of a small number of IT folks, becoming a major component in a state actor's campaign against Western interests. That's the kind of thing that we're going to see more and more of over the next decade.
Yeah, thank you so much. All three of you mentioned that the borders between politics, geoeconomics, and technology are more and more blurring. And one, maybe it's not the right word to say, but playground of geopolitical actors is currently the Ukraine. And Alex, I would like to ask you, how is the cybersecurity environment in such a conflict? How are companies also dealing with this, preparing for it? Please.
Yeah, so first I just want to say is, while this is a conference about cyber and I want to talk about that, obviously that's our area of expertise. We're on the verge of a massive humanitarian crisis, with the largest potential invasion in Europe since 1939. And the first use of kind of, the general is the expert in this, but I don't think we have a good example of kind of modern combined arms between two adversaries like this against each other. So I just want to say, I think we all should be cognizant of the human impact here outside of cyber, because it's going to be horrible. I think a lot of people are expecting that there will be, based upon Russian activity in 2008 and 2014, tied to a variety of their kind of foreign adventures, that there will be some kind of hybrid warfare that is going on here. We perhaps are seeing the start of that. There have been denial of service attacks against the Ukrainian government, the Ukrainian media, right? So you start to have, as Putin ratchets up the pressure on Ukraine, the use of a variety of cyber techniques to try to raise the pressure on Ukrainians and give them and to instill fear by cutting them off from sensitive areas of information. I think the immediate target will be in any Russian invasion, the communications networks, right? That's one of the big differences between now and previous conflicts, in that a huge amount of the command and control that happens with a military like Ukraine's is based upon the civilian network, right? And we do have stories of this that I'm sure the general can tell about, American soldiers buying Iridium satellite phones because they work better, than the initial equipment they're given and such. We'll see the same thing in Ukraine, where a lot of the command and control are going to be happening off of people's individual phones on the public network, on the public internet. Ukraine has their own telco companies. They also have a lot of telco that's actually run out of Central Europe and Western Europe. And so if from a Russian perspective, those are going to be legitimate targets. And then I would expect that if we end up with a NATO response, that part of the Russian goal to deter NATO from backing Ukraine will be to attack critical key infrastructure and companies in the West. Now, how much they turn that up and how far they go up the cyber escalation ladder, I think is a big question, because one of the things we've never seen before is we've never seen the US and our allies kind of unleash our offensive cyber capabilities. And it is unclear what that escalation ladder looks like between the West and Russia.
Yeah, thank you so much. Jeff, you mentioned that our vulnerability is pretty high or has increased because also of concentration and due to efficiency reasons, and that there's a lot of critical infrastructure. And Alex just pointed that out as well. Have we not learned from previous crises?
Oh, we've learned, but the economic drivers are such that efficiency wins. Efficiency wins almost every argument. And I wanted to pick up on some of the themes Alex was talking about, which is in this conflict, we haven't seen any real effort, maybe besides the financial FS-ISACs for information sharing or coordination, is more and more dependence on civilian infrastructure. And so in that environment, is there a responsibility, or is there something that the government should be doing to sort of say, hey, critical infrastructure operators or telco or non-critical infrastructure operators like Twitter, heads up, there's going to be conflict, we think. Switch to plan B, switch to red alert, whatever that is. And then that signals to industry like, okay, we're going into a potential conflict. What do? We start checking our BGP routes to make sure people aren't hijacking us. We run a full backup on all of our data. So if there is a destructive event, we're good right now. We were going to do it monthly, but we just got this heads up from our government. We're doing it now. Are there things now that, when I was really young, Alex, we had duck and cover because we still had the shadow of nuclear war with Russia. And so there were sort of preparedness drills. Do we have a civilian government coordinated drill that we're supposed to do? Because it really seems like everything we're talking about is the onus is and the harm is going to be on the civilian infrastructure and cloud providers and telco and the average citizens, yet they're not really included in any of the coordination or response planning. And I think that's a big gap that incidents like Ukraine and Russia are going to force us to have to adapt to.
General, again, I saw you nodding a few times. It would be great if you could also pick up that question.
Well, first, to answer what Jeff was discussing, we have to recognize that the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency was established to do just that. The problem was it wasn't established until about 2.5 years ago. In fact, it was established by Alex's now partner in the Krebs Stamos group, Chris Krebs, who did a wonderful job. But even part of that time, the government was shut down, actually. And so, again, they've made a lot of dramatic progress. And they're the ones who do oversee the cybersecurity for these different, I think it's 16 areas that are designated as critical infrastructure. As I mentioned earlier, you have sort of the gold standard. That's sort of the banking sector, the financial sector. Treasury Department oversees that. And what you have are departments and agencies that oversee these different areas that fall within their purview. Some CISA keeps itself, like election security, it famously, of course, was overseen. And you'll recall Chris Krebs assessing that the last election was, very, very secure and so forth. So here you have the United States leading economy in the world that's actually behind the others. We started after those. We heard earlier, actually, in an earlier session from the United Kingdom's Cybersecurity Center. They're way ahead of us. They have a better partnership with their version of NSA, GCHQ, very good public-private. CISA, again, terrific. Founding director, great. Subsequent, the second director, Jen Easterly, but a lot of work to do and really to make up for. I mean, a lot of us, I think all three of us were advocating for this kind of organization for years before it was finally established. So that's number one. Number two, it is very clear that cybersecurity is increasingly national security for the reasons that were mentioned. And then beyond that, when it comes, if I put my uniform back on again, cyberspace is now a domain of warfare. So you have the traditional ground, sea, air, now space and subsea, and you have cyberspace. And it is an actual place in which warfare actually is ongoing on a daily basis. The millions of cyber attacks that take place every single day, many of which do target elements of our Defense Department and other areas of critical infrastructure. So again, we can very much expect to see, because again, Russia has pioneered some of this to a degree, or at least actually used it more to some degree than other countries, that if they conduct a ground invasion, they're also going to be conducting a massive set of cyber attacks to bring down the networks of the Ukrainian forces who are trying to respond to what it is that the Russians are doing. So, and there will be much more than that. There will be exploitation of social media, putting out false information, and all the rest. So again, very, very substantial component of this, all of what we're talking about, cyberspace and cybersecurity, from what used to be just sort of a niche back in the day.
Jeff, please, I saw your hand.
Yeah, so this cyber as fifth domain is fascinating because unlike the other four domains, cyber adapts and it changes. And Atlantic Council put out a paper, I don't know, a long time ago now, about saving the future for our children on the cyberspace. And the idea goes that every time we fight in cyberspace or get into a political debate in cyberspace, it will adapt, right? Routes will change. Operating systems will be upgraded. That doesn't happen. If you shoot down an airplane, the sky is still there. You sink a boat, the ocean is still there. A tank on the land is still there. Not cyberspace, not the fifth domain. The fifth domain will change every time you tamper with it. And the concern is we tamper with the fifth domain too many times, we might not like what we're left with.
Unfortunately, time is running so fast, and I don't want to go to close this spotlight talk with a feeling of helplessness. Now we want to be helpful, and how do we overcome these challenges? And I would like to ask all of you again to identify your two big General Oscar-winning ideas.
Who wants to go first? Alex.
The General was muted.
Go ahead, General.
I identified the two areas that are the big challenges. You actually have to respond in those two areas as well. So you have to, again, make the creation of a comprehensive, integrated, managed cybersecurity solution based on zero trust principles the standard. That's what it is that you are going to want to establish. And then in the other area,
General, you are muted.
We have to figure out how to share at real time threat information and the threat mitigating measures. You know, what is the patch, what has to be done, so that it's not done at the speed of a human, but done at the speed of a machine. Again, CISA will be the quarterback for an awful lot of this, hugely encouraged by the two great leaders that we have had there and by the initiatives that they're taking, but they still need a ton of additional authorizations and appropriations. And our Congress in the US couldn't even get a law that would mandate mandatory reporting of breaches within 24 hours, much less at machine speed. So we have our work cut out for us without question. Thanks.
Great, thank you so much. Jennifer, I still would like to press you a little bit for this in-time communication and passing on of data and threat perceptions or threats. Are we ready for this? Do we trust each other enough to do this also across borders?
Well, again, let's try to get it within borders first. But you heard, by the way, from some of the others earlier in the sessions that, again, other countries are ahead of us. Germany does have a consortium. Others have consortiums. Again, the UK is ahead in certain respects. Don't get me wrong, the financial sector in the US is really pretty hardwired together. There are various consortia. And to be fair, the scale that the US has is vastly greater than any of the others as well. And we have states and territories and reservations and everything on top of all of that. So the challenges are greater, but we really are a bit behind where others have reached. And so we've got to very much pick up the pace. And yes, there will have to be a trusted component to that. You'll have to ensure ways of verifying that, for example. This is not undoable, and I'd leave it to the two real experts on here, Jeff and Alex, I hope, to confirm or deny that this is actually possible if people have the will to do it and are willing to put the financial resources and authorities behind it.
Thank you so much. Over to you, Jeff.
So if I had to pick two, I want to go with the wise words of Tony Sager, who used to run the defensive group at NSA, and his plan was to automate everything, because you can't win head-to-head against all your adversaries, so you're going to have to automate. So you automate all you can, then you have to study what you cannot automate, and then you have to automate that. I mean, that's one of your only hopes for the future is mass automation. And then the second thing is, I don't think we're going to get the kind of outcomes, political outcomes that we're hoping for, unless something is done with software liability reform. There's liability in everything else in life, automobiles, airplanes, but for some reason, the software shrink wrap license in the software industry is unique, and it's really become an impediment. And you can reform it in a number of different ways, but I see that as the next barrier that's holding back a ton of change. So if I could, software reform and more automation.
Thank you so much. And I also would like to press you on the issue of automation. The automation is still done, I mean, in parts by humans. Don't we have a tendency to build it?
Well, yeah, so the idea then there is, you're trying to free up the human to do the things that they do best, right? So companies, computers are not responsible, right? They're not liable. You can't hold a computer accountable. So therefore, they should not be making certain management decisions. Humans should be doing that. So what we need to do is make the computers as efficient as possible in the things they're good at, right? Automate everything you can, and that should free up the humans from doing the repetitive tasks and let them focus on these higher value decisions.
Thank you so much. And last but not least, Alex.
Yeah, so my suggestion would be organizations, if they want to play at this level, if they want to be truly ready for the kinds of adversaries that they are facing these days, they need to be in a constant mode of response. Organizations need to have internal capability to investigate and to respond to potential breaches. And they need to be feeding those responders with telemetry data, operational data, on endpoint data continuously. If you are an organization over 1,000 people and you are not constantly investigating a potential security breach, then you do not have enough information. You are not playing at that level. And then my other suggestion is executives need to just assume that they've been breached. Like the truth is being a CISO in 2022 is, you have to accept kind of the inevitability that you are going to be breached. Keeping adversaries of this level out of any reasonably sized organization is impossible. That doesn't mean we have to have nihilism and give up. What it means is that we have to focus on the rest of the kill chain of the different steps an adversary has to take to be successful in their goals. And so preventing initial breach is something you should work on, but not put all your eggs in that basket. You need to think about all of the other steps the attacker might take and have the ability to interrupt their kill chain before they get to the end.
Thank you so very much. To sum up, we don't need to be helpless, but we need to have the political will to solve the problems. This has been a huge pleasure, gentlemen. This was a firework of ideas, and you really wouldn't have needed me as a moderator. Thank you so very much. And we go back to the plenary.